owners of the PC version of Dark Souls Prepare to Die edition will be able to upgrade to Dark Souls Remastered at a discounted price.
Please feel free to take advantage of this campaign.
Thomas Anderson?
Yeah, that's me.
Hey. Great.
Unfortunately for you.
And I'm very glad they decided to include this loyalty discount to the previous owners. They also released the spec requirements for the PC version.
Hello?
I fucking called it!
Okay. All jokes aside, I wanted to revisit the subject one more time. The network test just finished and lo and behold, the remaster is Dark Souls 1. There is now no uncertainty. It looks like and it plays like Dark Souls 1, with more or less jank included. It's been reported that some exploits were patched, such as dead angling, ghost hitting, move swapping, and duping via menu swap as well. That's not to say that duping is entirely gone. If you know where to look, there are videos on how to dupe frame perfect. We will have to wait until it's released to see if other glitches, such as Sen's Fortress skip, was patched, or if they changed how grave lording works. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here. For the most part, I think Juutas put it the best way. The con of the remaster is that it's the same clunky piece of shit. And the pro of the remaster is that it's the same clunky piece of shit. Jumping off of my last video, I've seen a trend in how players view this remaster. I'm gonna make some broad points here, but I'll condense it down, I promise. If we were to look at the spectrum of opinion, on one extreme you have the players who haven't picked up Dark Souls 1 at all, completely fresh to this game while not necessarily new to the series. They may have played the later games, thus they're interested in seeing how it all began. They can't wait to try out the remaster, maybe even co-op it with their friends. Conversely, these players aren't aware of how truly flawed this flawed masterpiece is really going to be until they've stepped into Lordran come May 25th. Then you have the players in the middle, varying in opinion and circumstance. They don't hate the remaster, but they're not impressed by it either. They have reasonable doubt and small packets of hope, but I've seen that a majority of players are just glad that there are people playing Souls again. It was like this when Bloodborne became free on PS Plus and when Dark Souls 3 got its DLCs. The player count for Souls has been dropping over the past year, and this remaster is exactly what the doctor ordered, if you're looking for online interactions, that is. On the other extreme, you have players who are more than familiar with what Dark Souls 1 is. They've put hundreds, if not thousands of hours into the game, and now when a $40 or $20 price tag is asking them to essentially do the same thing, they're not quite as enthusiastic as the other side. In fact, if anything, for that price tag, they want more than what we've seen. Some say that Dark Souls should have gotten a better treatment than whatever this remaster is. Some even go so far as to call this remaster a blatant cash grab. So let's talk about that today. Is the Dark Souls remaster a cash grab? What's the answer? Well, the answer is yes. Of course it is. But let's define the term cash grab, right? It is a cash grab in the sense that selling a remaster at this point in time is a sound business decision. It is a profitable move for Bandai Namco to re-release the same game not only to the same audience, but to a new potential audience. And that game is not just any game, it is perhaps one of the most influential games of the past generation. That's going to pull a decently sized portion of the gaming sphere. And all this is going on while the original developers, FromSoft, are busy making their newest title. All in all, this means two things. One, the remaster pads out the lull period where From Software is just, for lack of a better word, hibernating. Two, FromSoft is now given a much longer time period to work on their next project. Bandai gave the job of remastering Dark Souls to a third party. In this case, Bandai didn't just get one developer, but two, Q-Lock and Virtuous. We'll touch on them in a bit, don't you worry. So this is a cash grab, right? Now the real question surfaces, does this remaster benefit the consumers? That's where the answers vary depending on who you are and where you're coming from. Bandai has given a discount for previous owners of Dark Souls on PC, sure, but they did delist the Prepare to Die edition on Steam. The Dark Souls Remaster visually looks like the same game from 7 years ago, while also not quite looking like the same game, but still definitely plays like the same game, while not necessarily. There's a split response leading up to the remaster's release between both hype and doubt. Some call the remaster authentic and faithful, others call it lackluster and lazy. Today with this video, I want to give you as much information as we have so that you have the ability to make the best decision and whether or not you ought to buy it. I want to use my last video as a jumping board. I'm going to bring up old topics from that one while still bringing new points to the table. I'm going to save my opinions for when they're appropriate this time, because I want to paint as much of an objective picture as I can with the topic at hand. I also want to make some corrections to my older video, as well as to clarify a few statements that were made. This will be the last time I talk about the remaster, until it's released, of course. Until then, I'm eager to return to nerdy spreadsheet stuff that don't have opinions, but we'll see where the winds take us. So without any further ado, first things first. We need to dispel much of the misinformation that's been going around. From Software is not working on the remaster. Like I said, QLOC and Virtuous are. Specifically, QLOC is developing the PC, PS4, and Xbox One versions, while Virtuous is working on the Switch version, which incidentally got delayed into the summer. Virtuous is a bit of a mixed bag. Their notable works have been on Final Fantasy X HD, Fable Anniversary, and Batman Return to Arkham, all of which have had visual changes varying in quality, whether it was lighting changes or straight up polygon changes. Their results for the most part are hit or miss. That fact alone may be part of the reason why the Switch version has the extended development time that it's getting. We would expect that the final product is a properly optimized port, one both in dock and on the go. If they can pull off a solid 30 FPS at Blighttown, then they've done their job. If they haven't...
Hey man, do you think that angry guy is simmered down yet?
You son of a bitch!
QLOC, on the other hand, has an impressive track record. They are the ones who saved the Mortal Kombat X PC port with Mortal Kombat XL. They also worked on the PC port of Dragon's Dogma, one of the better PC ports of any game period. I bet they know a thing or two on how to optimize a port, especially for the PC. Now, I won't give any promises, but this ought to mean that potato computers will have an easier time achieving the bare minimum of gameplay with the remaster, while beast PC setups will no longer struggle to maintain 60 FPS as the original version did even with DS Fix. If Digital Foundry is to be believed, then the PC version of the remaster will have many options to customize your experience, such as having a toggle for motion blur, for depth of field, for ambient occlusion, and it will have 2 sets of anti-aliasing.
Wow.
However, this raises another question. Is QLOC responsible for the change in lighting? Many have an issue with that, me included, but let's put a pin in that lighting topic for a bit, we'll come right back to that later. For the most part, the remaster seems to be in capable hands when it comes to solid performance. The network test showcased this perfectly, staying at a stable 60 FPS even on standard PS4s, but now we have to see Blighttown. That's the real benchmark, and something I bet QLOC, Virtuous, and Bandai are all sweating about. The next point of confusion I've seen out there, many like to point out the fact that Dark Souls Remaster is getting dedicated servers this time around. Thus, the internet between players must improve drastically. Unfortunately for you, that's not how it's going to work. We've been told this same shtick about Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3 in the past. They have dedicated servers, but dedicated servers in Dark Souls are actually for matchmaking and online connectivity. Online connectivity is your ability to find and connect to other players. Things like orange messages, bloodstains, white sign soapstones, and searching for another world to invade, for instance. With dedicated servers, signs ought to just appear a few seconds, if not instantly, when they're placed down, and connecting worlds via invasions ought to be just as quick. And again, the network test showed this off with flying colors. Not only that, but Dark Souls 1 originally had a system where it slowly built up connections with a maximum of 20 players. These players were the only players you'd see in an area. For all the time I played in the network test, I kept getting newer and newer players over the 6-hour period. Not only that, but I got to see some recognizable names as well. Only Afro, Adam Barker, Dark Lord Sen, SaintRiot. It was genuinely shocking to see all of them. Pretty cool. Anyways, dedicated servers get you into a world, but once you're inside, it becomes peer-to-peer. This is the difference. You will still be subject to the connection quality of the other player, which comes back down to whether or not their internet provider is garbage, or if they're using a LAN cable, or if they live geographically close to your part of the world. If you and the other player are good on all three fronts, then you're golden. If not, then there will be phantom range and lag stabs for days. I want to stress here that dedicated servers don't make Wi-Fi warriors disappear, nor make it seem like Australian players moved right next door. My condolences to the land down under, y'all have my respect. They do help bring you to water, but they don't give you a straw to drink it. I hope that analogy makes sense. The next thing that needs clarification is this. The Dark Souls Prepare to Die edition was delisted on Steam. I do want to clarify that the original Dark Souls isn't being taken from previous owners, it's simply being removed from its store page, meaning that it will no longer be available for purchase. No real reason was given by Bandai Namco either, well, besides reasons that we can speculate. This isn't a well-received move, with good reason. I'm not a fan of this move. A few have noted that this delisting may be because having both versions of Dark Souls available will split the player base and confuse new players. However, I do know people need a little more assurance than that. So before I start talking about hope, let's start at the foundation of despair. Bandai Namco wants to sell Dark Souls again, right? And they're a business. They're selling a version of Dark Souls that is supposedly optimized this time around against an older version that was never optimized with lower locked resolutions and crappy performance issues. Let's not forget, Bandai isn't Bethesda. They don't see DS Fix in the equation whatsoever. Hell, they haven't supported or even acknowledged the Dark Souls modding community much, if at all. And now when the modding scene for Dark Souls 1 is becoming increasingly active, with things such as the Prepare to Die Again mod and the Enemy and Item Randomizer mod, this means that new players will be cut off from the version of the game that has a huge amount of modding support. Not to mention that the remaster will most likely have the same soft ban approach to mods that Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3 has. If you even modify the game data with something as simple as a texture mod or as complex as the aggression mod, the remaster will end up detecting that and soft banning you to a server where modders are sectioned off, like they're in their own modding purgatory. There are ways around being soft banned, but still, removing the original Dark Souls from purchase gives plenty of reason for fans to be frustrated. This is, of course, assuming that Dark Souls Remastered has the same soft ban approach as Dark Souls 2 and 3. However, this news isn't the end of the world. This is where some hope comes in. The delisting could mean one of three things. One, the Prepare to Die edition will either remain delisted on Steam forever, which is the worst case scenario. Two, they're going to relist the game at a later date. Or three, they're going to bundle the original Dark Souls with the remaster. Now, I can't say for sure that they're going to bundle the two games together. Past evidence may suggest a pattern, like how Scar the First Sin gave a discount for PC owners of Dark Souls 2. Thus, we were able to predict that this remaster would get a similar discount for Dark Souls 1 owners on Steam, but I wasn't able to find a situation where Bandai Namco themselves bundled a remaster with the older version of said game along with it on the Steam store. This would be a first for them, which would make the possibility of it happening even less, but we still have to consider the possibility. That leads into the second outcome, relisting the game later. There are examples of games that have been delisted in the past only to be brought back. Deadpool, for example, it's been taken off not once, but twice. This was most likely due to Activision's license on Deadpool expiring both times, but still it shows that games can come back. Aliens, Colonial Marines, and Aliens vs. Predator were both delisted without any announcement by Sony, only to be relisted a week after. And the most recent game to resurrect is Call of Juarez Gunslinger. After being delisted for a month, Also without any explanation, Gunslinger is back on Steam thanks in major part to Techland Publishing reaching a partnership with Ubisoft. So perhaps this same result might happen to the Prepare to Die edition. We could also use Skyrim as an example. If you search for the original version of Skyrim on Steam, it won't pop up on the search engine. Only the $40 special edition will. You can still find the original game Steam page, but you'll have to do some digging for a link. This is an example of an outright delisting, but this could be what ends up happening to Dark Souls. This delisting may all be temporary, but take that hope with a grain of salt. What's frustrating here is the fact that we don't have much transparency with Bandai Namco to keep us, the community, well informed on these matters. We're kept half informed, in suspense most of the time. Why do we have to dig into the past to guess at what Bandai's next move could be when they could just tell us? We want to be assured and confident moving forward because we want to support them in their games. Getting your PC fans peeved at you isn't a great way to inspire confidence in your product. But that does bring up an interesting idea. If the PC community had enough power to petition Bandai and FromSoft to port Dark Souls 1 onto the PC, which was the birth of all this, they ought to have enough power to petition the relisting of the Prepare to Die edition. If we don't end up getting it bundled with the remaster, and if the original version doesn't get relisted by, like, say, the end of the year, PC Master Race, get ready to gear up and roll out. It's just a thought. Speaking of which, as of right now, Bandai has been on relatively thin ice with a decently sized chunk of the Souls community. And I say chunk of the Souls community delicately because not everyone is angry with the remaster, just as much as not everyone is pleased with the remaster. It's due to many reasons, one of them being how the game looks in certain areas with the new lighting model that they're implementing. Oh, geez, this doesn't look right. Well, that looks fine, maybe even a little better. As Digital Foundry once put it, this remaster is a mixed bag when it comes to changing the looks. In my experience of the network tests, it just looked like Dark Souls 1, but at 60 FPS. But hell, some are just annoyed that the game still looks similar to how it did in 2011. No extensive improvements were made after all these years. Some were hoping for an update of some kind to the graphics. It didn't have to be Shadow of the Colossus or Spyro levels of upgrade, but could it have been something more? Many like to point back to the original teaser trailer, saying that it had them believe that the remaster would run on an improved looking engine, even though this trailer looks to be more of a pre-rendered cutscene akin to other trailers that came out for Dark Souls. Anyways, I briefly talked about remasters and remakes in my last video, but I didn't clarify the difference between the two. What I wanted to highlight at the time was the fact that the developers and publishers want to sell you the same game. Whether it is a remaster or remake doesn't necessarily matter. But yes, remakes do rebuild the respective game from the ground up. They could improve the gameplay, they most definitely improve the visuals, they could also enhance the soundtrack while they're at it, maybe even add in more content, hopefully not with a DLC price tag. Contrast that with remasters, which are typically just an HD port with higher resolution, faster performance, and more consistent frame rate, if not just straight up increase the frame rate. I want to piggyback off of what ParagonDS once said. The Dark Souls remaster is attempting to be a hybrid between a remaster and a remake, while not exactly excelling in either field. It's the jack of both trades. This is a by-the-books remaster in that it does increase the resolution and the frame rate and smooths out the performance, but they did also change how the lighting works with the in-game models to mixed results. At the same time, they are making changes to how the game plays, like how healing items work in invasions, adding the totally new bonfire by Vamos, moving the dried finger from near the late game to nearly the beginning of the game, and they're increasing the online player count to 6. Some have questioned, is that all they're changing? Now, while we might have issues with some of these changes, I do believe the bigger picture is lost when we say that the remaster objectively isn't worth it. The common feeling amongst PC players is that the remaster is a $20 patch that they already have access to. Y'all are right, but console peasants can't say the same. 720p is all they got. 10 FPS of Blighttown is all they got. You can hear the groan of the past-gen consoles whenever anyone throws a firebomb at the screen. The backwards compatibility on Xbox One still chugs at the undead parish bridge, if not even more so. It is a fact that the remaster is an upgrade for both the PlayStation and the Xbox. Meanwhile, this remaster will be Nintendo's first Souls game. This is exactly what Bandai wants. They're trying to tap into that money pool that is the current gen consoles. As of right now, they're batting 3 for 4 platforms. It's a must-have for console players, but for PC players, the fact is, it's passable. After all, it's the PC players who have the objective advantage when it comes to gaming. I still consider it a missed opportunity that the remaster isn't a definite buy for all of the platforms. Why can't the PC players have just as much incentive to buy the remaster as the console players? PC players are important too. When Dark Souls originally came out on Steam, it sold so much they ran out of Steam keys. If anything, that and the continued modding support clearly show that the PC community is passionate about their series. At the very least, give them the ability to get the original Dark Souls bundled with the remaster, Bandai. Unless you're willing to allow mods on your freshly cooked remaster too. But we'll see where that goes, Bandai. We're watching you. Meanwhile, I've heard the argument that the Dark Souls remaster ought to be made free to PC players like how it was with the Skyrim Special Edition and the Bioshock Collection. It's completely fair to compare these remasters together, and it's a strong argument. The only logical conclusion that I could find as to why the discount only goes so low as $20 is because Dark Souls has online. It has servers now. If Dark Souls was purely offline, maybe it would have been a different story. Instead, that $20 minimum is probably them asking for server maintenance costs. Someone's got to keep the light on in the server room. And they got a new squeaky clean one too, one that's promising to hold 6 players in an area all at one time. Ooh. They also do maintenance on these servers, which I hope is gonna help. Bloodborne servers had maintenance before it became free on PS Plus to prepare for the coming surge of new players. I think that server maintenance angle is Bandai's last line of defense before we can truly classify the $20 or $40 as greed. But before we go anywhere, contrast that $20 and $40 price tag to something like Modern Warfare Remastered, which at release was glued to a totally different game. Since then, the Modern Warfare Remaster has become a standalone title, but then it came out with $15 DLC. Suddenly $40 became $55, nearly as much as a brand new game. And then there's the issue that the remaster doesn't run properly on quite a few PC setups. But don't just take my word for it. Read up on the Steam reviews and watch the YouTube videos that say just that. Now, the Dark Souls remaster still has to fulfill on its end of the bargain when it comes to performance on the whole PC spectrum, so we'll have to keep an eye out for that. Overall, Bandai asking for $20 is definitely them taking cookies from the cookie jar, but they aren't beating in your mother's kneecaps while they're at it.
Oh God, you startled me. I'm sorry.
Here's another thing. The remaster has been called the $20 or $40 DS fix patch. If we're still comparing this remaster to, say, Skyrim of all games, Skyrim's base game never got the unofficial Skyrim patch when it got re-released for the umpteenth time now. You know, the mod that fixes every little detail about Skyrim for Bethesda, where they, for the most part, have left the game alone besides a few fixes here and there. Compare Bethesda's patch notes to the entire unofficial Skyrim patch notes. That thing is a novel in and of itself with what it fixes. Everything from fixing items clipping each other in some small corner of the world to fixing potentially quest-ending bugs. That's impressive. Modders, we do not deserve you. We are unworthy. Also, Skyrim has Creation Club. Mods for a price. But again, I need to stress this statement. When you're trying to argue about this with nerds over the internet, keep the whole picture in mind. What may look like a patch to you may look like a godsend to someone else. This may be a plus for console players, but PC players ought to have been given more bang for their buck, even if it is now $20. There are different corners of the gaming sphere with varying opinions, and as long as the discussion is civil and sane, don't go dismissing someone else just because they don't have the same perspective as you. We gotta do our part to turn this reputation of the Souls community around. The community is capable of great, generous acts, while also capable of incredible amounts of salt and y'all's favorite trigger word, toxicity. So, keep it real, to the best of your ability. Now let's back up a little bit. Let's talk about if the remaster could have been more than what it is. While we can argue for days over what could have looked better, what is still in contention is the gameplay. There are some that are not fans of the backstabs in Dark Souls, or the poise system, or the lack of omnidirectional rolling. The network test showed that much of the original combat is staying for good. In fact, Dark Souls 1 combat is like a giant web of problems, you feel me? If you're going to change one fundamental mechanic, you'd have to change several other things along with it, prompting effort that might demand an entire remake of the game if you wanted to do it right. You would have to have FromSoft at the helm too, but they're not working on the remaster. They got another game to work on. And getting a remake was something that wasn't promised to us when the remaster was announced. Now just really quick, follow this web of problems we got here. If you give players omnidirectional rolling, now players will be able to roll behind you a lot. Now you're going to get backstabbed a hell of a lot easier as well. The next thing you'd have to get rid of is the instant backstab mechanic. Change them to how they work in Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3 by adding a startup animation before the backstab is confirmed. However, it was reported that this remaster would have no new assets. Where are you going to get that new confirmation backstab from? Dark Souls 1 doesn't have startup swings to their backstabs, they're instant. Would poise still be passive? Or should the poise change to mimic how Dark Souls 2 or Dark Souls 3 is now? If the poise is still passive, the slower backstabs will still follow through once you get the backstab animation going. Callie on YouTube has a video on this concept in action showing what passive poise in Dark Souls 3 would really look like. And that's the issue, Dark Souls 1 gameplay as a whole. Now, you don't have to lock on in Dark Souls 1 all the time to defeat PvE enemies or PvP players. When it comes down to it, you can just unlock to roll in any direction you like and lock back on as soon as the rolling's done. I'm not saying that the lack of omnidirectional rolling isn't an inconvenience for newer players that aren't used to it, nor am I saying that the passive poise is the superior poise system. They are definitely game design decisions from the past, but we have to be aware of what's really going on underneath the hood when we want to have something fixed in Dark Souls. That entire conversation would prompt a whole nother video in and of itself. InfernoPlus had a neat list of improvements that would benefit Dark Souls 1 without impacting its gameplay much, adding in things like cloth physics, aimable crossbows, having the ability to two-hand your offhand weapon, and either improve or completely redo the UI, stuff like that. If the foundations of the game would change, however, there are only two outcomes that I could see happening if the creators went down that route. For all intents and purposes, Dark Souls 3 is Dark Souls 1 fixed. Though for some, people would say Dark Souls 3 is Dark Souls 1 neutered. Instant backstabs are gone, poise is no longer passive, only active during attack animations. Players only get stun locked into short combos like 2 consecutive R1s, weapon arts, or whenever the split leaf greatsword says stop. Graphics have vastly improved, you have omnidirectional rolling, you have 6 players online, it's all there. Yet at the same time, Dark Souls 3 is considered to be the most limited of all of the Souls games in terms of gameplay. It has the moniker of being called the polished boar. The faster weapons that can secure a stun lock quicker, like straight swords and curved swords, dominate slower weapons if they just don't straight up go for a backstab altogether. This is also similar to how slower weapons in Dark Souls 1 are always in danger of getting backstabbed or parried. There's also a longer video to be done comparing all the Souls games and their PvP combined, but that has to be saved for another day. Still, some want a game that looks like Dark Souls 1, but plays like
Dark Souls 3.
If you do, all the more power to you. Number 2, Dark Souls combat would have to go in a different direction. Not necessarily a Dark Souls 2 kind of different direction, but you know where I'm getting at here. If the creators were to really touch up this game, make an experience that's new not just for newcomers, but for older players as well. New mechanics, new additions to the world, change the enemies, change the item placements, balance how weapons swing, how much damage they do, maybe fix the stats and make it so resistance is no longer useless and endurance is no longer a dump stat. They would have to change basically everything. But at that point, that's not just a remake, that's a new game. Alas, it's true. Dark Souls 1 has broken gameplay. I'm not arguing that it doesn't. The texts of the game are unintuitive and were clearly not meant to be in the game in the first place. However, if you want to continue to play either the remaster or the original Dark Souls, then you will have to warm up to the idea that these texts and exploits exist, especially if you want to play online. Because in all the patches that Dark Souls 1 had, FromSoft never touched toggle escaping. They did try to balance the dark wood grain ring, they also tried to balance tumble buffing, but toggle escaping still remains, even in the remaster. Perhaps they saw toggle escaping as a convenient out for the imbalance that their poise system created. Once someone is stun-locked in Dark Souls 1, if toggle escaping didn't exist, you would get stun-locked to death if they had enough stamina. There shouldn't be a need for these exploits, yes, but they matter all the same. Here's a bit of a far-fetched metaphor. Think of it like Super Smash Bros. Melee. That game also has imbalanced and unintended mechanics. Check out the video, Melee is Broken, and its sequel, and the tournament version. There are some ridiculous game design decisions that make you go, why is this like this? Why is that like that? Why? But the fact of the matter is, when it comes down to it, you have two choices in both Smash and Dark Souls 1. You either drop it and play another game. No one should fault you if you do. It's completely understandable why you don't like it, trust me. Or you sit down and you learn it. You learn how to beat those backstab fishers. You learn how to beat them at their own game. At the end of the day, the gameplay is still broken, yeah, but it can still be fun. It's all about how you value your time in this game if you choose to value it. Need some inspiration? Go take a look at ProjectGoof. He did a video where he invaded at SL1 with no upgrades. He's intentionally gipping himself. In the video, he perfectly articulates what it's like for a Dark Souls 3 player who's learning Dark Souls 1 for the first time. It's a challenge, and it will be difficult, but if you have the temperament, there is fun to be had. The same goes for all the games in the Souls series. Dark Souls 2 PvP had a strong community upholding it through thick and thin, through MauLer and hbomberguy. Bloodborne's PvP began to really shine after its DLC was released, but nobody knew this because the vast opinion of the PvP at the time was so negative that it threw the game into obscurity. These games are flawed. Yes, again, that's not what we're discussing here. For those players who want to put more hours into the Souls games, more than just a handful of playthroughs and for longer than a month after release, it's all about your attitude. If it's not for you, it's not for you. Don't sweat over it. But if it is, then get used to seeing the "you died" screen. Keep trying. And soon enough, you might not see that screen anymore. Or you like seeing that screen because that's your kink. I won't shame. For players who only want to play solo and be separate from the online, then you don't even have to worry about all that tech stuff anyway. Just enjoy the game. There's plenty of Dark Souls to enjoy besides the PvP. Now while we're still here, let's briefly talk about some of the remaster patch notes. Changing how healing works in invasions is completely reasonable. We go from 99 humanities that heal slowly but fully, to 20 Estus that heal a tad quicker but not as much. Estus chugs are still punishable though. There is so much footage from the network tests that shows this. And yes, Phantoms and Invaders get half of the total Estus, leaving them at the disadvantage. Also, if the patch is to be believed, this ought to mean that Elizabeth Mushrooms and Divine Blessings will also be disabled during PvP. You could have 99 of both on you at one time in Dark Souls 1. Add that onto the 99 humanities you had, and a player could have 297 consumables that would heal them to full health. I could see why they made the change for only Estus in PvP. Also, adding the Bonfire by Vamos serves a couple of purposes. It's a convenience for players looking to upgrade their weapons, while at the same time it will also serve as a death trap for newer players who don't have the Lord Vessel. Think about it. If they can't fast travel out of there and they're not at the right level, then that means they're stuck with a bunch of pissed off skeletons, necromancers, and Patches himself.
Good day. You look reasonably sane.
It would also be interesting to see what happens when you switch covenants at bonfires now. In the past, if you left a covenant, you lost half of your covenant rewards and your rank within that covenant changed as a result. Will changing covenants not only be convenient but ignore the punishment from before? We gotta see what happens. Meanwhile, the password system is a change that was needed. This makes connecting with other players, other specific players, a hell of a lot easier. Fellow invaders, y'all forget that players want to play Dark Souls with friends sometimes. If that means that you're gonna fight a Havel mage that's max level, well, we gotta hope that they get scaled down properly in their damage and their health, or else invasions in Dark Souls 1 are going to be hell. implying that they aren't already. Then again, some of you masochists out there will love the challenge. More power to you if you do, but let's hope for a proper scaling system. Speaking of scaling down, I also want to believe that they're going to try to fix how twinking works in the remaster. One of the patch notes says the following: when the guest player's character level and weapon is higher than that of the host player, the level will be adjusted accordingly. SaintRiot had a theory that this meant if an invader with a higher upgraded weapon and armor matches with a host that has lower upgraded weapons and armor, said invader will be scaled down relatively to the host, similar to how an overleveled phantom is scaled down to their host. If the developers do this system correctly, there would be no need for the weapon upgrade matchmaking of Dark Souls 3, which wouldn't even make sense to have in Dark Souls 1 in the first place since you can upgrade armor as well. Let's not forget that there are catalysts that don't need upgrades like the Ulasil Ivory, but can still do insane damage with spells like Darkbead. It would be too complex of a system in a world that's not as linear as Dark Souls 3. Realistically though, they might still keep the current system of invasions where an invader with fully upgraded gear can just one-shot a low-level host to their heart's content, but I would hope they would at least make some change in that regard. Now, I'd comment on the other notes, but we gotta wrap up this video, I'm running out of time. It may seem like I'm contradicting myself here. How can I say that fixing Dark Souls 1 in the remaster can't be done while also saying that the remaster patches are going in the right direction? That's because the patch itself for the remaster is small scale compared to the bigger changes a remake would have to do. The changes they've shown off are, for lack of a better word, surface level. A lot of people can agree on this. It's slightly smoothing over what's already a really rough game. So far, they haven't done anything to the fundamentals of the game that we've seen, like with the poise system, the stats, the weapons, the movesets, and especially the backstabs. These changes are just that, conveniences, quality of life. For instance, having more players to co-op with or fight against ought to match the levels of chaos that Dark Souls 3 has now. Or invaders could just be spawn killed by 4 phantoms.
Oh shit.
I hope I've made my point clear. We're going to start to wrap this up. Speaking of points, I do want to bring up a point that I made in my previous video. I asked the question, how many of the people with the negativity are people who actually care about Dark Souls? How much of the criticism for the remaster is coming from a place of genuine concern rather than a fleeting bandwagon? I will admit that this was my weakest point in the video. This stance came from an emotional place. What perturbed me when I was making the script was that I didn't want the legitimate criticisms to be overshadowed by meme-filled responses. Memes are great, and Dark Souls would be missing a lot of soul if it didn't have them, but there has been a particularly strong vitriol to any mention of buying the remaster. I made the last video to serve as a devil's advocate, to give a reason as to why someone might be interested in picking the game up. Also, when one of the searches on YouTube is a complaint video. And with all due respect, Paragon, that video didn't have a whole lot of substance. What's interesting is that Paragon also came out with a longer and much more reasonable take on the remaster, a coherently worded video titled His Thoughts, but instead, this is what new players get to see. The divide that we're creating amongst ourselves. Regardless, I would hope that people would not confuse what's a troll comment and what's a genuine outcry. But it is the internet. Things are easy to mix up. Who knows who's being real and who's not? Someone with honest intentions could get their emotions wrong, like how I did. More than a few comments in my last video's comment section perfectly reflected both sides. There were authentic rebuttals and just straight up jabs. I will take the L though in that I ought to have been more meticulous in my assertions. I'm not afraid in admitting I'm wrong, but I do want to be careful and not give wrong information. That's the purpose of this video that you're watching. I'm not saying that we should just gobble up whatever gets put on our plates, but don't start a food fight just because your peas touched your mashed potatoes, you know? Your voices are valid. Just keep it clean, please. Now let's wind down a bit. I don't know how much $40 is to some of you, or $20 for that matter. $40 to me is a full tank of gas, or a week's worth of groceries. $40 to you could be a payment for a card, or a night out with friends. This $40 to me is the chance to give the original Dark Souls the playtime I never gave it. I haven't done a complete playthrough of the original Dark Souls, and now I'm being given that opportunity to do just that. Not to mention the fact that that $40 might translate into hours and hours of additional content with friends and new players alike. And for some out there, you may have already had your Dark Souls fill. In that case, your money will be best spent elsewhere. Like I have said before, and I will say again, you are not required to buy this game. Skip it, by all means. There are many other games in the industry that are worth the same price or cheaper. Hell, save that money for whatever Shadows Die Twice means. Or get Monster Hunter. Or go get Guns of Icarus. Yeah, go get Guns of Icarus. It's for 15 bucks. Go get it right now. It's a really great game, I promise you. And bring some friends. Y'all have friends, right? I mean, I hope y'all do, right?
It's about to storm. We're actually under a tornado watch.
Now, for those of you who stuck around this long watching this video, and you haven't tried Dark Souls yet, then I implore you, give it a try. This game is much more than the drama it's stirred up recently, more than the scratch on the helmet or lag stabs. It's something you have to experience. And now with the remaster, you're being given that chance for the current gen. It's not something for everyone, but it could be for you. Switch players, prepare to feel the need to break your consoles in half. And I want to see pictures if that does happen. But seriously, don't break your Switches, they're expensive as hell. As for the rest of you, wherever your wallet leads you, I hope it's money well spent. At the end of the day, you can't put a price on happiness. That's what Fortnite skins are for. And that's about as much as I want to say on the remaster. I mean, there's undoubtedly going to be more to say, but for now, that's enough for me. The fact that the remaster has generated so much traffic in such a little time just goes to show how passionate the community is for the series. We gotta hold on to that passion, or else the fire will really fade for good this time. But then again, what if it should?
Just an RPG, I do just what I gotta do. I had to cut some.
Thank you all so much for watching. Hit like if you enjoyed the discourse, leave a comment if you want to share your perspective, and subscribe if you want to see more garbage from yours truly. I'd love to hear what y'all have to say, and be sure to ding that bell if you want to get notified when I upload next. This month's gonna get busy real quick. Until then, I hope y'all have a good day and a good night. Play nice out there, y'all. And remember this, family's important. Family is a lot of things. You could have people who care about you, who aren't related by blood, but they can be more of a family than those who are. Just remember you have people who want the best for you. They care about you, and they'll be there for you. You're not alone out there, skeleton. So don't give up.
I give a fuck about my hit points. Smoking on a thick joint. Healing shit in Chrono Trigger. Listening to Pink Floyd. All these people up in here, and yet I feel a bit void. Resuppress my memories. Shoutouts to Sick Freud. Shoutouts to Big Boy. That's the state that I am in. Switch my potions up so I no longer take no Vicodin. No religious bitches in my circle like Leviathan. See, you being born again just means that you can die.